615 Sessions podcast. Turron Davenport of ESPN is here. Cory Curtis of WKRN News 2 is here. And that means that there is Titans discussion to be had. Boys, how we living?
Oh, everything is great, man. I'm reporting to you live from Girl Dad duty. My girls over there getting their hair done. School starts on Tuesday, so got to do what you got to do.
I told Turron, man, and I tell everybody, have girls. Boys are trouble. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
Dads unite.
And then that very quickly, before practice, launched into a conversation about how an alligator can change what sex it is based on the heat coming out of the nest, courtesy of Cory Curtis.
When the eggs are laid, they are sexless. And then the temperature of the nest determines whether they are going to be boy alligators or girl alligators.
Which is the things that we learn before Titans practice. But we're not here to talk about things learned before Titans practice.
Good.
We're here to talk about things learned at Titans practice. And yeah, Turron was not prepared for that particular version of the Girl Dad talk. So we quickly wave in front of the screen if you're watching on YouTube, this embarrassment of an unofficial depth chart. We have to start here, boys. I told Cory before we started rolling Turron that the idea that they would list Jeff Swaim as the starting tight end, among all of these things, is an insult to all of our intelligence. Tell people why this thing is stupid that I'm holding in front of me.
Well, first and foremost, you got to look at unofficial.
Yeah.
That says a lot. But then also, a lot of people get tied up in first string, second string, third string. It's not necessarily, you got the first group, right? Your starters. It essentially boils down to starters and reserves. And then you have reserves that mix in with the starters. This is checkers, not chess. I don't think it's something that we should get too bent over, out of shape about. It's like, okay, it's a guideline, but none of it is official.
Well, I would say a couple of things. Number one, availability is the most type of important ability for a football player. And I don't know how you become number one by leading the peloton, but that's what Jeff Swaim has done to this point. But I agree with you that it's unofficial. But I do think that coaches try to send messages with these types of things. And Mike Vrabel said as much in his post-game presser today, or post-practice presser today, when he talked about wanting the youngsters to earn their way into these spots. So yes, he's saying that, yeah, it's just unofficial. It doesn't matter, but there's a reason we're not listing guys here. They got to earn it. Now, he said that they will earn it, and some guys will earn their way off of that list. And so you ask yourself right now, are they sending a message to Anthony Firkser? Because, yes, we all expect big things from Anthony Firkser in the passing game, but is Anthony Firkser doing enough with the rest of his game? I don't know, but is that message being sent?
Well, and to that point, I mean, it's not just Firkser who is clearly in the driver's seat for a starting position on this team. You got Caleb. Otherwise it becomes an inherently different conversation about the tight end, because Luke Stocker, my friends, is not tight end one. That much I can tell you. But Caleb Farley and Elijah Molden, 4th and 5th on this depth chart, according to the corners. Now, inevitably, that will not be the case unless there is disaster, which is always possible, i.e. last year. But, I mean, Cory, with what we saw today, I thought it was such a great teaching moment for Caleb Farley and for the rest of the team that would witness that moment for Caleb Farley, where they're going through 11 on 11. He's in coverage. He trips, kind of gets caught up in himself, lays down on the play. Logan Woodside, athlete that he is, takes advantage of the down corner, starts scrambling in the direction of the down corner because he gave up on the play. He goes on to talk about Vrabel does after practice, guys. Cleveland and Pittsburgh, games that they got their asses kicked in the first half of those games, but found ways to get up off the ground in the second half. I thought that was as ironic and timely a lesson for these guys to learn, and something that Vrabel, I think, very much took advantage of today.
Yeah, it's not college football. That's for sure. And how long do we see college guys have to learn about when a guy with the ball puts a knee down and they stop playing? You have to play, and what do they like to say, to the echo of the whistle, and you never know when you are going to catch up on a play that you think you're out of. I'll never forget that play when the Titans played the Eagles and they left that dude uncovered on the outside, and Jarrell Casey tracked him down about 40 yards downfield. That's the tape Vrabel needs to pull out to show everybody after that type of situation. You can't ever give up on a play because you don't know if getting up and making that tackle 40 yards downfield is going to be what ultimately saves the game, because it can be the difference between a touchdown and a field goal, or even a missed field goal. You can't take plays off. You can't take half a play off.
And this is the time, Turron, when those obviously, it's good that they're getting him in as early as humanly possible, it seems, because since being activated, he hadn't missed a day of practice, even though he may not have gone through a full practice.
Yeah, it is really good that you get him out there, because the whole idea is to get him as comfortable as possible, not only physically but mentally with his recovering from the injury, but also you want him to get a better grasp of the playbook. You want him to understand the assignments and things that you're asking him to do. And no one, well, I'll say very few people on this planet learn better than by actually being out there and doing what it is they're asked to do. So that's all for the better. I think really there's a variety of reasons. And for me, you mentioned not giving up on a play. I think a good example is you look at last year, the Cardinals and Seahawks with DK Metcalf, showed his above human ability and tracked down Budda Baker, and they ended up winning the game by less than a touchdown. And that play actually was a big factor. So that's an example of why you never give up. And I just like the way Coach Vrabel was quickly able to go to that point and just kind of deliver that when he spoke to us, because there's always a moment where you could coach somebody up. And I think Coach
So to that end, with what Turron's talking about, coachable, teachable moments, you have Ryan Crow over the weekend, the outside linebackers coach, where they're going through the Harold Landry. It's a perpetual theme. We talk about Harold Landry's second move, whether he's coming out of Boston College, and we're saying, okay, here's what he's got. This is where he needs to develop last offseason or coming into 2019 when he had a great year. Seems like a lot of people had Harold speed dip move figured out. Then you hear Ryan Crow on Saturday, Turron, talking about they want him to make different mistakes in this training camp, and they're taking away his fastball. And I thought it was one of the best coaching and teaching moments that they've let us understand as a part of the media, because that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out where these guys are at, not necessarily the Inquisition every time we get them on a podium.
Yeah, exactly. And I asked Coach Crow that specifically because I wanted to know. I mean, this is like year 2 at the very least of, okay, what else does he have in addition to the fastball? So he said that they're asking him, well, not asking, excuse me, they don't ask the players. They're telling him not to utilize that because they want him to develop something else. Get something else going. And I think that's really smart. And it's just like a pitcher, right? And you use the fastball reference. Okay, Noah Syndergaard has a big time fastball. Okay, that's great, but you want him to work on a curveball, and spring training is when you do that. And just the same, that's what Landry is able to do now. I also asked him about some of the cut-ups and things that they're showing, and they're showing him different, not players specifically, but different moves that he could begin to acclimate. But the biggest thing is to be out there executing those. And that's why having Bud Dupree there to kind of show him some other moves is really important, and getting him to execute that there in practice.
And that's something that Weaver has brought up. Rashad Weaver, who went through a little bit of a different line of questioning of his own right this weekend. But Rashad Weaver, rightfully so, absolutely. But Rashad Weaver has brought up Bud Dupree and kind of the teaching moments that he's even had from him early on, just because they share a financial advisor and we're able to connect that way. Ola Adenyi, who came to this team in free agency, Cory, also spoke of big brother Bud, who's doing all of these things to show them how to diversify their skill set as pass rushers.
Well, when you pay a guy $16 million a year, obviously the number one thing you want is productivity on the field. But you also need that person generally to be a leader. I remember when the Titans gave Chris Johnson all the money, they basically said, okay, here's the money. Now we also need you to do this, 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 and this, which he hadn't been doing in the past. it goes with the territory. And that's why you have to be careful with the type of person that you select to write those kind of checks to. You have to know the man. Can they handle it? Can they deliver on all the things that you want to do? Everything I've heard from Bud Dupree tells me he is that kind of guy. Now, I would say with Harold Landry, yes, he needs to develop another move. Obviously, he needs help on the other side, obviously. But, as I said before, the old cliche, available is the biggest type of ability. But I think you don't want to be on the other side predictable. And when you're predictable, people know how to set up for you over and over again. So you don't have to have 15 moves. If you have two good moves, you can set each other up. So if we'll see if he can take that next step. It would behoove him to take that next step because I believe he's in a contract year, and I believe this league pays guys handsomely who can get 9 or more sacks in a season. He could set himself up to really make a lot of money if he can deliver this season. Now, I like Harold Landry. I think he does a lot of things that help this football team because they like big, strong guys who set the edge. We'd like to see him get to the quarterback more, but he's on the field. He plays physical. He plays strong. He's a move away from being a really, really good player and making a lot of money.
For certain. And in the meantime, we'll have the opportunity because I don't imagine Harold's going to play much on Friday when they go down to Atlanta. I can't imagine many of the starters would, but we do have the opportunity to see a bunch of different guys who are going to be behind Harold and Bud Dupree. John Simon is somebody who's been starting in this defense in the absence of Bud Dupree until like Caleb Farley. Bud has been back, 3 days now, recording this podcast on a Monday, and he has practiced in some capacity on all 3 days, which is a good sign if you're a Titans fan keeping track of all of the various injuries that everybody's on individual plans for. Rashad Weaver, John Simon, Derek Roberson, probably on the outside at this point, given the snap disparity between him and somebody like Wyatt Ray from last year. What I guess in the preseason are you, Turron, most focused on? Because there's going to be a lot of different stuff to look at, but I wonder if there's any one particular position like edge rusher.
Yeah, it's always easy to say the receivers. Obviously, Marcus Johnson, a guy, I've spoken about for quite some time. And
wave the flag, baby. Wave the flag.
That's right, man. Marcus Johnson got the TD stamp of approval. So we're going to keep that going. But Chester Rogers, too. But I think you hit it right there. I'm going to be watching. I want to see Derek Roberson get back on track to where he was. You look at his rookie year, and he was a guy that, he sacked Drew Brees. He was a key player. In the championship game against the Chiefs, you saw him getting important reps. So I want to see him continue to take that next step. I know that guy has a lot of ability. Coming out of high school, he was a big-time recruit, had some stuff. He ended up, at Sam Houston. But there's plenty of ability there with him. And as a matter of fact, Monday we're recording this, and he's coming. He had a pretty nice day today, to be honest with you. I watched him over there during the half line period, and not necessarily rushing the passer, but as you mentioned, aggressively setting the edge. And that's something that he did. When you saw him turn the tackle inside, Derrick Henry had to bump a couple runs inside because it wasn't going to be able to go outside. Those are the things I want to look at and see him doing, those little things, which all add up into an increase in reps, which definitely will help his productivity.
Which is a good sign, because when we talked to Crow on Saturday, when the analysis was, well, this is the best he's ever looked in camp, that felt to me like a little bit of a kiss of death. I'm like, they're reaching for something nice to say about the guy. He's got to show something. He's got a couple of weeks to get this thing going.
Well, I'm really looking on the defensive side of the ball, guys. I mean, that's what's going to determine this year for this football team. I know we like those young DBs. How do they step up in the game? I want to see that swagger. I want to see that intensity. And we all like what we're seeing from the front seven, right? From Tier Tart and Laurel Murchison. And we think it's better. And I don't know how much those guys are going to play, but I'd like to see them play some to see if that continues in a game situation, especially because I think the Falcons are going to try to play physical. I mean, I think that's going to be one of the changes with Arthur Smith. I mean, shoot, didn't he just bring in Deontay Foreman, about a 295-pound running back? I mean, they're going to try to be physical. It's going to be a good challenge for those guys up front. I want to see if they can carry that over onto the game field and the step up from the corners from the young guys.
It's a good listen. It's a good strategy. But it's just much harder to be bigger and more physical than everyone else when the team that you've just left has Derrick Henry and Julio Jones and Roger Saffold and all these big nasty bruisers. So Art got a little work to do down there in Atlanta, but it's going to be a fun preseason game, mostly because it's just football, but an interesting preseason game with some good storylines to be able to follow. I guess, Turron, going back to the wide receiver position, we haven't seen Julio or AJ Julio a little longer at this point. AJ, the last 2 days in a row, everybody on individual plans, so nobody aggregate this or panic about what's being said about the wide receivers right now. But the guys getting reps behind them is a critical part of this. Marcus Johnson, you've brought up, who's been stellar throughout camp. Now, the one thing that I'll give any validity to on this depth chart is the idea that they got Chester Rogers as the punt returner, because that's somewhere they like him, and it's a good opportunity to find a roster spot for a 5th or 6th receiver, depending on how they do the math this year. Outside of Marcus Johnson, what have you seen from the rest of this group, whether that's NWI or Cam Batson, who's been around here for a couple of years, or even Des Fitzpatrick, as he looks to find his footing in his rookie season?
Well, I'll start with Fitzpatrick. And to me, just as you said, he's looking to find his footing. I think what he's being asked to do, I mean, they cross-train everybody, but he's the guy that you're seeing get reps at all three, right? So he really has to know all three. I think that's slowing him down just as far as the grasp of the playbook and just everything just kind of spinning. You could tell that there's a little bit going on with him just as far as thinking too much or even just not being comfortable. And that's not surprising from a rookie. I mean, heck, not too long ago, you used to say a rookie receiver doesn't really have a chance, and likely he's not going to really get into his full grind and go zone until his 3rd year. Right. Obviously, it's a lot different with guys like Odell Beckham Jr. and Brandon Cooks and all these guys coming in, impacting immediately Amani Cooper, but still, that's something to A.J. Brown, in fact, that's still something to consider. And I think he's a guy that's going to make the roster, obviously, but I don't see him being activated on game days. So I feel that there's much more progress for him to be made. But, when I look at Chester Rogers, you see him, he actually had a catch today. And I mean, daggone, it was Jayon Brown hit him and a DB hit him, and he held on to the football. It goes back to something that we as receivers, you always believe, hey, I'm going to get hit anyway, so I might as well catch it. And that's what he did. So it was good to see that. And he just continues to make those type of plays in tight windows. Ryan Tannehill truly has trust in him. So that's something to watch. You mentioned Marcus Johnson. Just consistency, that's really the thing for me. Westbrook Ikhine is becoming more comfortable catching the football. He had a couple altercations with it recently, but, you see him embracing the football when it comes his way. So that's a much better thing. Racey McMath has been kind of up and down. But one thing that I see with him, that dude loves a high point. You put it up there, he's going to go get it. And that's just a part of his natural ability, his size, and his athleticism. So you see those. Freddie Brown, right? I was calling him downtown Freddie Brown, to start camp. I'm going to get away from that name. Unfortunately, he's having his struggles. But the thing that I'm seeing mostly, he's carrying one rep to the other. And you can't do that. When you have a drop, you got to leave it there, right? And he had a bad period yesterday, and he just kind of kept just allowing it to accumulate, and you can't do that. You want to stack good days and good plays, but not bad ones. So he definitely has to get better there. Cam Batson is another one where, coming in, I thought for sure that he had a roster spot, at least from a return perspective. But truth be told, when it comes to just playing the slot purely, I think Mason Kinsey is the best pure slot receiver. But Chester Rogers has been a little more consistent as far as inside and outside. And as you mentioned, he has the inside track for the punt return duties. So we'll see what happens there. I got him keeping 7. I wouldn't be surprised if they do that. And it's going to be close, man, how they have these groups. So we'll see. But I'm looking forward to watching Mason Kinsey, though, on Friday because he's from Atlanta. So seeing him go home, and get to play there is going to be good. And I just love the guy's work ethic and what he brings.
one
Buck,
of
I know
these
this is
7
your
receivers.
podcast.
Well, I was just going to say one of these 7 receivers that the Titans may keep, not downtown Freddie Brown, out of town Freddie Brown is how this is trending at this point.
I as I say, I know this is your podcast, but I did want to ask a question to you guys and bring it
sure.
up. I mean, Josh Reynolds did not come here on a big deal. He got 1.75 million, and we all know he missed a week or so at camp. And we continue to see Marcus Johnson, Chester Rogers elevating. Is that number 3 receiver spot in jeopardy with Josh Reynolds? Does he need to worry about that at this point, or is this just way too early?
I mean, Turron, I'll let you speak to this more in depth because you obviously understand the nuances of the position much more than Cory or I do. But like, I don't think that we should pencil in Josh Reynolds for wide receiver 3 just because he's a free agent acquisition. I think he has a place on this team. Certainly, I think he has utilization, many different facets that they can use him if he's right. I just don't know that he's. I don't want to make excuses for the guy, but I watch him and he just something about it doesn't look right to me.
Yeah, no, 100%. Something doesn't look right. I know he had a shoulder situation that was bothering him coming into camp, but you're right. Like that turnover, that acceleration, that burst, I'm not really seeing that. And let me say this, right? I don't believe it's going to happen, but Chris Sanders and I, for our segment on my podcast, we talk about this a lot, and Chris always brings it up. He doesn't even know that Josh Reynolds' roster spot is guaranteed. Now, I would be surprised if he got released, but I take it back mentally to 2016. The Eagles, they went out and signed Chris Givens and Ruben Randall, 2 deals right in that similar ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't work. They let their behinds go.
Well, financially, it's not a big hit.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, but I'm not saying that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I asked Coach Vrabel specifically about Reynolds. And he said there were kind of basic things that he said that he was impressed with. His professionalism. Okay, well, how? He didn't make mistakes. You're not seeing mental errors. Okay, but you expect more than that from your number 3 receiver. You want to see plays being made out there. Mm-hmm. But just another thing with him is during minicamp, and you saw it briefly a couple of days ago in training camp, he was back there with the group of returners. And by the way, punt returners, that is. And they had Amani Hooker back there as well. I don't think they're going to do that, but, they're just throwing guys in the mix.
Yeah. I mean, one year, 1.75 mil, fully guaranteed for Josh Reynolds. The opportunity was here for him pre-Julio Jones, but the opportunity becomes much more complicated, especially with the way that we've seen these guys behind him theoretically on the roster take their game up to another level. Chester Rogers and Marcus Johnson have been around the league for a while. Not that Josh Reynolds isn't a vet at this point, but there are just things that, as you said, Turron, that makes you feel as a spectator that they can be trusted in situations so far in practice. Clearly, I mean, today, Tannehill looked as good as I've seen him look. Yeah. For all of the stink made about training camp interceptions and all of this stuff early on in the past couple of days, Cory, like I'm just looking at this and saying, no, he's just figuring out who he can trust. And it's not Fred Brown, because Fred Brown, there's an interception every time they throw it to Fred Brown.
Well, it's a good time for him to figure it out because obviously he doesn't have AJ and Julio to throw to. And, we've seen when Ryan Tannehill first came on, who did he throw to? He threw to the guys that he worked with the most when he was the Titans' number 2 quarterback. I mean, Anthony Ferkser was one of his guys. A.J. Brown was coming back from that hamstring, so they worked a lot together, and he was his guy. And so, it took him a while to get really on board with Corey Davis and the ones. I mean, that wasn't necessarily there. You could see the comfort zone, though, with Ferkser and Khalif Raymond and A.J. Brown and all those guys. So it is a valuable time for all of those guys. And, we keep talking about Marcus Johnson and Chester Rogers. Turron, stacking practices in camp in a positive way is tough to do. No matter how soft we say camp is now, it's still hot. It's still a grind. You're still out there working every day. And these guys are stacking, and that shouldn't go unnoticed. Now, I'm always the guy who rains on the parade and says, look, if these guys play, that means Julio Jones and A.J. Brown really aren't playing. And so that's look, if those guys are getting a ton of work, one of those guys is not. All right. Now they could be
playing and getting a ton of work are two different things. I could definitely see them rotating in. And we talked about the number 3 receiver.
Yes.
Right. And both of these guys can play inside and outside, just like Josh Reynolds and obviously like Jones and Brown. So if they're getting snaps, I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, it's not a bad thing, but it's they're taking somebody else's snaps away, and that's why I say to Josh Reynolds,
3 receivers on the field.
Do you think we could see more 4 receiver personnel this year than we've ever seen from the Titans?
Yeah, possibly, and it could be that look, right? But with Firkser lined up out wide or in the slot, or Darrington Evans.
Yes, I expect to see that. I expect them to use Darrington to try to create the mismatches that Jonnu created before with his speed.
It certainly helped the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen to be running those 4 wide receiver sets. I mean, it fits his skill set very, very well. And to your point, Dawson Knox, the tight end local product, is that Firkser role for the Bills when they use 4 wide and one of them's a receiving tight end. I think there's going to be a lot of fun storylines to watch. Of course, you can watch the preseason game against the Atlanta Falcons on Friday on WKRN News 2. Preseason coverage. That's your home. And you can also find Turron Davenport on Sports Extra and all of our friends, Emily Proud and Kayla Anderson. And while you're not doing that, you can listen to the Talking with TD podcast, because that's great pregame coverage as well. The boys got you covered. They've been kind enough to grace us with their time here on the podcast. I'm excited to have football back, boys, because that means we can talk about it in like actual ways that actually make sense instead of just preseason nonsense like we've been doing for the past 3 months.
Well, I say about this team with the wide receiver situation, it's very refreshing to talk about how you keep it down to a number instead of how to create a number higher. How are they going to keep 5 of these guys? Because we've had a lot of those years.
Taywan Taylor. I don't need to live that. God love him. He's a sweet guy, but
I think he's on the COVID list.
He's in a worse spot. He's in Houston, which sounds like
they moved him to running back.
I would rather be on the COVID list than be on the Houston Texans roster right now. Turron Davenport, Cory Curtis. Thanks for the time.